Reading What is Cinema? Volume 1 by Andre Bazin. Painting and Cinema. Cinema's about paintings, at least those that use them to create something, the structure of which is cinematic, meet with an identical objection from painters and art critics alike. Of such are the short films of Emmer, Van Gogh by Alain Resnais, R. Hessens and Gatson Dow, Pierre Katz Goya, and Guernica by Resnais and Hessens. Their objection, and I myself have heard it from the very lips of an Inspector General of Drawing at the Department of Education, is that however you look at it, the film is not true to the painting. Its dramatic and logical unity establishes relationships that are chronologically false and otherwise fictitious. Between paintings, often widely separated both in time and spirit, in Guerry, Emmer actually goes so far as to include the works of different painters. A form of cheating hardly less reprehensible than the use of cast of fragments of Goya's Caprices to bolster the editing of his Misfortunes of War. The same is true of Resnais when he juggles with the periods of Picasso's development. Even should the filmmaker wish to conform to the facts of art history, the instrument he uses would still be aesthetically at odds with them. As a filmmaker, he fragments what is by essence a synthesis, while himself working towards a new synthesis never envisioned by the painter. One might confine oneself here simply to asking what the justification for this is, were not a more serious problem involved. Not only is the film a betrayal of the painter, it is also a betrayal of the painting, and for this reason, the viewer, believing that he is seeing the picture as painted, is actually looking at it through the instrumentality of an art form that profoundly changes its nature. This was true from the first of black and white, but even color offers no solution. No one color is ever faithfully reproduced. Still less, therefore, is any combination of colors. On the other hand, the sequence of a film gives it a unity in time that is horizontal and, so to speak, geographically, whereas time in a painting, so far as the notion applies, develops geologically and in depth. Finally, and above all, the use of a more subtle argument that is never employed, though it is the most important of all, space, as it applies to a painting, is radically destroyed by the screen. Just as footlights and scenery in the theater serve to mark the contrast between it and the real world, so by its surrounding frame, a painting is separated off not only from reality as such, but even more so from the reality that is represented in it. Indeed, it is a mistake to see a picture frame as having merely a decorative or rhetorical function. The fact that it emphasizes the compositional quality of the painting is of secondary importance. The essential role of the frame is, if not to create, at least to emphasize the difference between the microcosm of the picture in the macrocosm of the natural world in which the painting has come to take its place. This explains the Baroque complexity of the traditional frame, whose job it is to establish something that cannot be geometrically established, namely the discontinuity between the painting and the wall, that is to say, between the painting and reality, whence derives, as Ortega y Gasset has well stated, the prevalence everywhere of the gilded frame, because it is a material that gives the maximum of reflection, reflection being that quality of color, of light, having of itself no form, that is to say, pure formless color. In other words, the frame of a painting encloses a space that is oriented, so to speak, in a different direction. In contrast to natural space, the space in which our active experience occurs and bordering its outer limits, it offers a space the orientation of which is inwards, a contemplative area opening solely onto the interior of the painting. The outer edges of the screen are not, as the technical jargon would seem to imply, the frame of the film image. They are the edges of a piece of masking that shows only a portion of reality. The picture frame polarizes space inwards. On the contrary, what the screen shows us seems to be part of something prolonged indefinitely into the universe. A frame is centripetal, the screen centrifugal. Hence, it follows that if we reverse the pictorial process and place the screen within the picture frame, that is, if we show a section of a painting on a screen, the space of the painting loses its orientation and its limits and is presented to the imagination as without boundaries. Without losing its other characteristics, the painting thus takes on the spatial properties of cinema and becomes part of that, quote, picturable, end quote, world that lies beyond it on all sides. It is on this illusion that Luciano Immer based his fantastic aesthetic reconstructions, which have served as a starting point for the existing films of contemporary art, notably for Alain René's Van Gogh. Here, the director has treated the whole of the artist's output as one large painting over which the camera has wandered as freely as in any ordinary documentary. From the, quote, Rue de l'Ars, end quote, we climb in through the window of Van Gogh's house and go right up to the bed with the red eiderdown. René has even risked a reverse shot of an old Dutch peasant woman entering her house. Obviously, it is easy to pretend that films made this way do violence to the very nature and essence of painting, and that it is better if Van Gogh has fewer admirers, even if they fail to let on what exactly they admire about him. In short, the argument is that it is a strange method of cultural dissemination that is based on the destruction of its very object. This pessimistic outlook, however, does not bear close examination either on pedagogical or, still less, on aesthetic grounds. Instead of complaining that the cinema cannot give us paintings as they really are, should we not rather marvel at Or should we not rather marvel that we have at last found an open sesame for the masses to the treasures of the world of art? Question mark. As a matter of fact, there can be virtually no appreciation or aesthetic enjoyment of a painting without some form of prior initiation, without some form of pictorial education that allows the spectator to make that effort of abstraction, as a result of which he can clearly distinguish between the mode of existence of the painted surface and of the world that surrounds them. Up to the 19th century, the erroneous doctrine that painting was simply a way of reproducing the world outside provided the uninstructed with an opportunity to believe themselves instructed, and thereafter the dramatic episode and the memorial tale multiplied the occasion. We are well aware that this is no longer the case today, and it is this which seems to me the deciding factor in favor of the cinematographic efforts of Luciano Immer, Henry Stork, Alan Rene, Pierre Katz, and others, namely that they have found a way to bring the work of art within the range of everyday seeing, so that man needs no more than a pair of eyes for the task. In other words, no cultural background, no initiation is needed for instant enjoyment. And one might add, perforce, of a painting presented as a phenomenon in nature to the mind's eye by way of the structural form of the film. The painter should realize that this is in no sense a retreat from ideals or a way of doing spiritual violence to his work, or a return to a realistic and anecdotal concept of painting. This new method of popularizing painting is not directed in any essential way against the subject matter, and in no sense at all against the form. Let the painter paint as he wishes. The activity of the filmmaker remains on the outside, realistic of course, and this is the great discovery that should make every painter happy, a realism once removed, following upon the abstraction that is the painting. Thanks to the cinema and to the psychological properties of the screen, what is symbolic and abstract takes on the solid reality of a piece of ore. It should therefore be clear from now on that the cinema, not only far from compromising or destroying the true nature of another art, is on the contrary in the process of saving it, of bringing it to general attention. More than with any other art, painter and public are far apart. Unless, therefore, we are going to cling to a kind of meaningless Mandaриnism, how can we fail to be delighted that painting will now become an open book to the masses, and without the expense of creating a whole culture? If such economy shocks the cultural Malthusians, let them reflect that it could also spare us an artistic revolution, that of, quote, realism, end quote, which has its own special way of making painting available to the people. What of the purely aesthetic objections? Question mark. As distinct from the pedagogical aspect of the question, these derive clearly from a misunderstanding that demands from the filmmaker something other than what he has in mind. Actually, Van Gogh and Goya are not, or are not exclusively at least, a new rendering of the work of these two painters. Here, the role of the cinema is not the subordinate and didactic one of photographs in an album or of a film projected as part of a lecture. These films are works in their own right. They are their own justification. They are not to be judged by comparing them to the paintings they make use of, rather by the anatomy, or rather the histology of this newborn aesthetic creature, fruit of the union of painting and cinema. The objections I raised earlier are in reality a way of giving definition to the new laws following upon this mating. The role of cinema here is not that of a savant, nor is it to betray the painting. Rather, it is to provide it with a new form of existence. The film of a painting is an aesthetic symbiosis of screen painting, as is the lection of the algae and mushroom. To be annoyed by this is as ridiculous as to condemn the opera on behalf of theater and music. It is nevertheless true that this new form has about it something definitely of our time, and which the traditional comparison I have just made does not take into account. Films of paintings are not animation films. What is paradoxical about them is that they use an already completed work sufficient unto itself. But it is precisely because it substitutes for the painting a work 1 degree removed from it, proceeding from something already aesthetically formulated, that it throws a new light on the original. It is perhaps the extent that the film is a complete work, and as such seems therefore to betray the painting most, that it renders it in reality the greater service. I must prefer Van Gogh or Guernica to Rubens, or to the film from Renoir to Picasso by Dehayarts, which aims only at being instructive or critical. I say this not only because the freedom that Resnais has allowed himself preserves the ambiguity, the polyvalence characteristic of all truly creative works, but also and supremely because this creation is the best critic of the original. It is in pulling the work apart and breaking up its component parts and making an assault on its very existence that the film compels it to deliver up some of its hidden powers. Did we really know before we saw Resnais's film that what Van Gogh looked like stripped of his yellows? ? It is of course a risky business, and we see how dangerous those are. It is, of course, a risky business, and we see how dangerous from those films of Emmer which are less effective. The filmmaker runs a risk through artificial and mechanical dramatization of giving us an anecdote instead of a painting. One must also take into account, however, that success depends on the talent of the director and on how deep is his misunderstanding of the picture. There is also a certain type of literary criticism which is likewise a recreation. Baudelaire on Delacroix, Valery on Baudelaire, Malraux on Greco. Let us not blame the cinema for human foibles and sins. Films about painting, once the prestige that comes from surprise and discovery has faded, will be worth precisely as much as the men who make them. And I was reading Painting and Cinema in What is Cinema? Volume 1 by Andre Bazin.